Welcome to the Training Ground Guru podcast in association with Genius Sports. In every episode, we bring you insights into the teams behind the teams in professional football. Coming up on today's episode.
You know, you ask Maurizio and we say they're going all the way, but obviously a lot of things would have to go in our way for that to achieve. You know, I think there's a number of measures and metrics. Most of those we try and keep internally around the culture of the group, but clearly we want to get out of the group and get as far as we possibly can by playing, really attractive soccer that just, unites the fans behind the team. And, we finished the World Cup in a really positive place.
I'm Simon Austin from Training Ground Guru, and I'd like to welcome you to Series 7 of the TGG podcast. Our first guest of the new season is Matt Crocker, the Sporting Director of US Soccer. Matt has been in the role for almost 3 years and is responsible for setting the Federation's sporting vision and performance strategy across all 27 national teams. 2026 is going to be a huge year for both Matt and US Soccer, with the opening of a new national training centre in Georgia and hosting a home World Cup. Before joining US Soccer, the proud Welshman was head of coaching and development of the English Football Association and director of football for Southampton. I spoke to him about his career, about his current role, and about his ambitions for this summer and beyond. We hope you enjoy this episode, and if you do, please give us a follow via your preferred podcast provider. Thank you very much for joining us on the podcast, Matt.
It's a pleasure to be here, Simon. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Whereabouts are you speaking to us from today?
Speaking to you from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm at home. We're just in the process of moving into the National Training Centre in about 6 weeks' time. So at the moment, the temporary offices we've got, the Wi-Fi is a bit spotty. So I'm talking to you from home today.
Yeah, and I was reading up a bit about the new training centre, and it looks fantastic. I was reading over $200 million, I think, has been spent on that in total.
Yeah, I think it's probably a fair bit more than that, if I'm honest. Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible training facility, and to play a small part in, from the idea through to the executing of the facilities. I mean, they don't do anything by halves over here. I mean, it's going to be an incredible facility to be the envy of most associations and most clubs, to be honest with you.
Yeah, could you just give us a little insight into what is going to be there, what's involved, what the facilities are like?
Sure, yeah. So it's 100 acres with another 100 acres for a potential in phase 2. And currently within the footprint of the 100 acres, there's 8 youth national team pitches of a high quality. There's 2 outdoor AstroTurf or Turf 5G or whatever you want to call it, fields for coach education and for community use or whenever we need to use those that are outdoor. There's 2 beach courts for our beach men's and beach women's team. There is 3 super pitches for our senior men's and senior women's teams. 2 show pitches, like mini stadium pitches for our youth national team games. And then there's a huge building with high performance center, everything you ever need regarding recovery. There's a huge amount of coach education and meeting spaces, and on the ground floor, 16 huge changing rooms, 3 different levels of quality of locker rooms. And then upstairs, there's the offices for our national team staff. I think there's space for around 600 employees upstairs as well. So yeah, I don't think I've forgotten everything. But again, all the fields are floodlit, got every piece of kit and technology you could ever possibly imagine. And there's also a huge amount of support from companies like Nike around research and innovation within our high performance center that exists within the facility. So we're in good shape and excited to move in.
Is it a big step up from the facility that you had previously?
Oh, I mean, say this respectfully, we're a traveling circus. We play in the US. We're reliant on, or we have been historically reliant on clubs to allow us to use their training facilities wherever we play in America. So, we did have a small facility for coach education in Kansas City. And we've historically had a few, not many, a few fields in LA at the LA Galaxy facility there. But this is, light years away from, or light years different to what we're moving into now, that's for sure.
How would it compare to St George's Park, where you worked before, the home of the England national teams?
look, I'm biased because I'm here and I've been involved in the build from here. But we've visited St George's Park recently. We've also visited a number of other training facilities, the new German one, the French. When John Rudkin was kind enough to take us to Leicester City, which obviously is an incredible facility. I think we've done a better job at designing the facility with the player's journey in mind in this one. So we've got everything that St George's Park has, but I feel because of the time, it's a different quality of facility. But I think it's much more compact in terms of it's not huge spaces between things. So, I really like the way we've designed it with the players' views in mind. We have 27 national teams. I forgot to mention, we've also got a full-size indoor power court for our power team and also futsal arena within the facility and a St George's Park full-size 11v11 indoor field as well. So Jed Roddy works for FIFA now. Obviously, he used to work for the Premier League as head of youth, and he was blown away by the facility. It's going to be pretty incredible, that's for sure.
Fantastic. Oh, did you say a power team there?
Yes, yeah, we have a power team, so power chair team. So we have 27 national teams that as sporting director I oversee. Obviously, the men's and women's senior teams, our youth national teams, both in the boys and young men's pathway and the girls and young women's pathway from 15s individual age groups all the way through to 23s and then seniors. And then we have 9 extended national teams, including power, beach, futsal, CP, and our deaf teams as well.
And you're coming into a huge year for the Federation with the World Cup, obviously, in the summer, the home World Cup. How's all that going? What's this year been like for you so far?
Yeah, I mean, everyone keeps saying, you must be like ridiculously busy. I mean, you're always busy in the job, but I don't feel any busier than I have been over the last couple of years. I think when you're talking about a World Cup, for me, the key role is to make sure that way out from time, you get the right staff on the right seats of the bus and make sure that they've got the resources to create a really robust plan to support the team and the things that they want to do. And I feel really confident, and Maurizio's guidance that we're in a really, really strong position with that. You can't control and dictate results, but you can control whether you're the best prepared team going into the competition. And I really feel like we're in a good place with that. And obviously, majority of the tournament being held in the United States is a significant advantage for us. It's meant that we've been able to do our planning around things like hotel training facilities way out in advance, which gives you if you use it, gives you a competitive advantage, that's for sure. But I also think it's a key 5 years for US soccer. So, this is the beginning of, I guess, what I would call like a real springboard to accelerate the game over here with men's World Cup this year, 27. We've got the Women's World Cup in Brazil, fingers crossed around qualification for that. We then have, the Olympics in LA in 28. And we've also got the Women's World Cup coming to America in 2031. So, there's a real sort of opportunity with the next 5 years if we want to grasp the opportunity and the challenge.
Fantastic. And you've been in the role for 2.5 years now, about that.
You'll be coming up 3 years in May, so end of May.
Okay.
So, so that's it's gone really, really fast. Very, very different from working in a club. But I've really, really enjoyed the experience and continue to, take every opportunity that we can as both professionally and personally as a family,
And it seems like it's been incredibly busy, really, from the off. So you've got the new training facility, as you say, new men's and women's senior head coaches. I was reading as well about the pathways strategy that looks very interesting. So that kicks in soon, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that we can talk about and dive into. The 3 years have been busy, and when you take on a project of this size, I don't think until you get into the role that you truly begin to understand the context of what the history of the game looks like over here. And, you can't just lift and shift from another country. There's so much difference, just the size of the country alone. I think I described the challenge of like trying to get every country in UEFA on the same page around a player development or a philosophy. It's that big, I think somebody showed me on a map the distance between the northest part of England and the southest part of England was the same around a short distance in California somewhere, So, the size and the scope of the challenge is massive. And we've also got to recognize where the game is. Clearly there's been a lot of success in the women's game, but the women's game is evolving, and countries are now, there's so many superpower countries who are injecting the female game with talent and developing their own talent now, and that game's changing. And historically, you would arguably say the US has been right up there with the top nations, and we continue to be. But the challenge is, how do we sustain being either at the top or close to the top in the women's game? And then the difference in the men's game is, it's in some ways night and day. We've got a great group of players for the World Cup, and we're really excited about what this talented group of players can achieve. But historically, in the last 10 years, when you look at the data, so we've done some work with the 21st group with Omar there, and we've never had a player in the top 50 in the world on the men's side. When you think about a country with the ecosystem, the infrastructure, the resources of America, and that diversity and quality of players, it's a real surprise that we've never been able to do that. And then you also go look at the top 250 players in the world. We've only ever really had two in that, with Christian Pulisic and Tim Howard. So our challenge is, what needs to change in youth development to start to develop a better quality of young player that can start to get in those top 50 and the top 250? Because consistently, if our challenge is, how do we consistently be a top performing nation at major tournaments, both in the men's and the women's game, something fundamentally has to change within the system to allow that to happen. So it's a really big, huge, mammoth challenge that ultimately is going to take years to shift. There's no quick fixes here. There's no silver bullet. It's 1,000 things that need to be done differently and better than it's been done before. So yeah, it's a huge challenge.
And obviously there's not the long-term football culture that you would find in England, and you've got some big national sports to compete against as well for that participation.
Yeah, 100%. And you can look at that as also a huge opportunity. So when you look again of the male and female, child athlete, and you look about how do we make sure, one of the biggest challenges with US soccer, so we have this one of the new initiatives that we've got is Soccer Forward, and Soccer for All. So how do we get facilities? How do we get the game in every community in America to start that soccer is a bigger offering for, I say this respectfully, not just the kids that can afford to pay to go to certain clubs, but actually it just becomes a part of communities and school sports, which obviously is a huge advantage to those nations that have already got that built infrastructure. So, I think there's a huge opportunity here as well. There's a huge amount of soccer going on in the boys and girls game, but how do we make sure that's, soccer for all, that every kid has the opportunity to play if they choose to, which isn't always the case as where we are right here today,
Yeah, and we had Tom Vernon, the former head and founder of Right to Dream, on the podcast. They've obviously started an MLS franchise, San Diego, and he was talking about pay to play, saying that is a huge problem, he thinks, for grassroots football in the States. So could you just tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, of course. It's a huge challenge. The cost to a child and family to play at a high level of the game in America, it's no secret. It's something that, there's a lot of huge, powerful clubs that provide, elite soccer in this country. But obviously it comes at a significant cost to parents and to kids. Whereas the difference, so my son is over here now. He's 17, just turned 18. And I don't think, he's played for a great grassroots club in England pretty much all of his life. And I think the fees for that are £120 a year. There's children out here that have to pay, thousands of dollars to be able to be on a travel team, to play at a quality game, or to get a quality level of coaching. So, we have a number of initiatives to begin to address that. The pathways, as you mentioned earlier, the project is a key one. How do we create a really simple, clear pathway where every club recognizes where they are in the ecosystem? At the moment, there's a lot of teams that can't play other teams because they might be close together, but they compete in different leagues and they don't like each other, and that, they're not prepared to. It just raises the cost because then kids have to fly and travel and stay overnight. So what we're going to try and do is to, where we can, as much as we can, alleviate the costs of that. So travel costs is one key thing. I think the second key thing that we have to address is the standard of So I think there's a lack of education right here, right now, and I say this respectfully, around parents' soccer experience. I think a lot of parents make decisions of where they send their son or daughter because of a league table from a previous year, as opposed to a club that provides an individual development plan for their child, that takes a player-centered approach, that provides equal playing minutes, that has X qualifications of coaches, that has a certain type of facilities, that plays a certain way, that has a real philosophy across the culture of the club. So I think they're the things that we would like parents to start to focus on more. And I think that ultimately would raise the levels. And at the same time, we as US Soccer have a huge job around simplifying the structure to bring down the cost of pay to play. The MLS is doing some great work now on providing free opportunities for talented kids to go into that program from I believe mostly from 14. But there is a huge amount of development work that goes on, as before 14, that we have to make sure is freely available at a very, very low cost to every child, irrespective of their level of experience or where they currently are technically or tactically in the game.
And how does the academy system compare to England?
Yeah, very similar. I mean, obviously, it's way more in its infancy over here. When you think about the academy system, the Charter for Quality before that, and then obviously EPPP, that's been embedded in the system in England. And I'll use England as a comparison because that's obviously where we're both familiar for many, many years. But the MLS, obviously in its infancy of youth development, there's a huge amount of investment going across the whole of the MLS landscape around academies. But obviously it's in its early infancy days. But the joy is, I get to work with some great people at the MLS around partnerships. We've got some really great projects going on that we're partnering with them around. How do we provide some annual, similar to what EPPP, some annual checks and balances over what clubs are getting for their investment in the youth development, whether that's through player development or investment into coaching, etc. And how does that then translate into, future value of players going and playing for your first team or playing internationally, or obviously being sold on, depending on what your philosophy of your club is. So yeah, I get to work on some great projects, but the MLS are doing, really great work, but it's very much in its infancy right now.
And you were talking about the fact there hadn't been a US men's player in the top 50 in the world. What's the composition of the squad like at the moment? Would most of them be playing in the US, in MLS?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I first joined, it was, mostly from Europe, in particular on the men's side. And then on the women's side, it was, predominantly through the NWSL, the National League over here. When Maurizio joined, what we definitely realized is that we needed to grow the pool of players. Generally there was very little turnover between squads. And what Maurizio has been able to do is to, expand that pool. We're now in a position where we're tracking and monitoring probably about 75 players that, all feel like as if they've got a chance to come in and join this March camp and be selected for a World Cup. That's a very, very different position than we were in a couple of years ago. And, we're in what I would call healthy competition in the men's side. And then obviously led by Emma on the female side, we've done exactly the same. So we've got some of the squad, a small number of the squad now that are playing in Europe. Majority of our players are from the NWSL. But again, that pool of players has grown. Emma's introduced a futures group or under 23 group that work closely in lockstep with the senior women's team. And again, what you've seen is a huge transition of players. I think there's some stats. We've doubled the number of cap opportunities for female players to come and play for the women's national team under Emma's, compared to a longer period of time. It's phenomenal, the young players that we've got coming through by the women's game as well.
Do you see the World Cup as really key in growing the game and sort of furthering your ambitions as a federation?
Yeah, like I say, it's if we're talking about springboards, it's one of many that we've got over the next 5 years, and one that will give us a number of opportunities. One, talking about a successful World Cup in the US, where the men's team perform well, play great soccer, the fan base gets behind the nation gets behind it. You've felt it. You've been in England where it's there's just this feel good factor. Makes such a difference in terms of grassroots sports, or grassroots football, where all of a sudden the kids that weren't playing now want to go and join soccer, but we have to make that available and free. We can then, through having a successful World Cup and the next 5 years, create better and more investment, commercial revenue into the game. Us being a non-for-profit organization, every penny that we have goes back into the game. So we can do that at grassroots. We can offer better opportunities for coaching, for refereeing. The opportunities are endless. And also, when I say coaching, to start to get more mums and dads who go, oh, actually, I wouldn't mind being a coach of my grassroots sons or daughters team, getting them a really good, free or very low cost. How do I create a great environment for young kids to just go and enjoy and play soccer? We can have the opportunity to influence that in a much, much bigger and better way. So yeah, it's going to be pretty significant the next 5 years, and the World Cup is in 26 is our first opportunity to take that chance.
What would a successful tournament be for the team? Have you set a target?
You ask Maurizio, and we say they're going all the way. For sure. But obviously, a lot of things would have to go in our way for that to achieve. I think there's a number of measures and metrics. Most of those we try and keep internally around the culture of the group. But clearly, we want to get out of the group and get as far as we possibly can by playing, really attractive soccer that just unites the fans behind the team. And we finish the World Cup in a really positive place. That's where we want to be for sure.
Brilliant. And have you got one base for the tournament? Because you were saying it's an advantage that you've been able to get that in place.
Yeah, so we're out in LA. We've already got our base camp in terms of hotel setup and logistics and our training facility. And again, you think about the environments you want to provide for the players, because ultimately, fingers crossed, we want this tournament to be a really extended period of time. And there's an opportunity that when we finish top of our group, that we can stay on that West Coast longer, which means that we can maintain our base. We've got things like a friends and family program that is 20 minutes from the team hotel where they're all going to be staying, and they're key factors. Also making sure that we look after the families of the players in that period as well. So there's a lot that goes on that, if you perform well in the group stages, give you some competitive advantages also in terms of the number of rest days between games as well. As an example, we want to win our group and we want to stay on that West Coast as long as we can, because obviously the climate there is also more beneficial for us as well.
Fantastic. And you do think the team genuinely has a chance then to go into the knockout stages? And
yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. The group of players in a really good place. We're on a great run. We've played some really tough competition in the last 5 games and come away with some great results, whilst also growing the pool of players available. And there's a real healthy competition right now. So yeah, we're excited, and 2 great games coming up now against Portugal and Belgium in Atlanta. That'll both be sellouts. 70, 80,000 people watching those games. So we can feel the energy building behind the team, and we're excited to take those opportunities for sure.
And we've heard a lot about Maurizio on the podcast from people who've worked with him at Southampton, Tottenham, Chelsea as well, and a lot of very positive things. How impressed have you been with him, working up close with him?
Oh, I mean, I was lucky enough. I worked with him at Southampton, so I knew what we were getting, and I was excited for him to bring that into our environment for sure. He has got so many great qualities, not just as a coach, but also as a human. The culture that he has created now of this, very high challenge but high support for the players in the group. The expectations around high standards are second to none. As good as I've seen or been lucky enough to work with. So, and it's not just Maurizio. He brings with him a great small group of staff who have fitted in unbelievably well with what I would call our existing MNT staff. He's a phenomenal cultural leader and a great coach. So yeah, we're delighted to have him and excited, obviously, for the World Cup. And very similar with Emma. I don't want to miss my opportunity to talk about Emma Hayes as well. Everyone talks about the coaching side because that's what you see on the field, but the way and how hard these people work behind the scenes, and the culture and the style of leadership, I've learned so much from both of them. And I'm very fortunate as a sporting director to have what I believe to be arguably 2 of the best leaders in the game supporting our teams.
Was it very hard to get both of them in, because they are very high profile, successful managers, as you say?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think when you talk about these types of processes, it's never a one-way thing. It's for both of the roles at the time. We'd failed at Copa America on the men's side, and we'd failed at the World Cup on the women's side, which obviously forces the changes. So, what you've got to be is you've got to have a real sense of honesty about the challenges of the role and where you see the squads. So we did a lot of data that we presented first and foremost to all the top candidates around SWOT analysis. So this is what we think the challenges might be in this period. This is what we feel that the squad might need, both on and off the field, and how the skills that they then brought to support that. So it was just as much a selling job for us, for sure, to get them engaged, excited about the project. But I think once we got them both hooked in, it was they were, I say this respectfully because we did some phenomenal level of interviews. They were definitely the right fit, both culturally and as coaches for the environments that we want to create for our senior teams.
And Emma's already achieved great success with that Olympic gold 2024. So
yeah, and
a great highlight early on for you as well.
And that was a huge challenge, it's a huge risk, because to get Emma, we knew that we weren't going to be able to get her until the end of the season. And then that puts us in a difficult position of very little preparation time before the Olympics. So, Twyla Kilgore was our interim coach whilst we made the decision to appoint Emma. And Emma was obviously working to win the league successfesually at Chelsea, which she achieved that in her final year, whilst also supporting Twyla in an interim role to start to drip feed in some of the things that were going to be super important for the team to be ready for the Olympics. So for Emma to then hit the ground running, I think I can't even remember the number of weeks that she joined. So I think she joined in probably May. She probably flew out the day after the last game of the season, and it was all systems go. And obviously we were really successful in the Olympics. But that was a huge gamble, one that paid off, but one that even if it didn't, I knew that she was the right coach for the long term of the program. And sometimes you're always in the roles making sort of decisions between short term gains and long term, like what's right. But for me, definitely having the support of the federation to go, hey, we're not sacrificing the Olympics, but it's going to be a challenge. And obviously, it was a challenge that Emma was able to overcome. But the long term success and stability of the program and the change that we want to make, that's more important than maybe this sort of one-off moment. I think she was the type of quality of person and coach to be able to do both. So that's been hugely successful from hers and our perspective.
And I remember you did a very good presentation for us a few years ago at an individual development webinar. And,
okay.
And you were talking actually about when you were at the FA, which we could come back to, but you're talking about Dave Redding and how he always challenged, and you learned a lot from that. So I was wondering, do you get challenged as well by Emma and Maurizio and others within the organisation?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I have been fortunate enough to be hugely supported. I've got a great CEO in JT Batson, and Cindy Parlow Cohn, the ex hugely successful women's player and leader, is our president. So I've been hugely supported to be able to piece together an exceptional sporting leadership team that supports me, talent ID, operations, integrated performance support. Both Emma and Maurizio sit on that team. I think I mentioned talent ID, but also Barry Powell, who you probably come across from Belgium, who's been with the Federation for 10 years, is our head of youth national teams from 15s through to 23s. Got Tracy Kevins from England, who does the same role on the female side. So I have this unbelievably supportive and challenging leadership team that I learn more than I give, if I'm honest. I mean, they're unbelievable. And, to be able to have that quality of staff supporting you on the program it's the best leadership team I've ever been part of.
Because we had Emma on the podcast a few years ago, and I know she has a lot of ideas, doesn't she? She's very inquisitive, creative in her thinking.
She certainly keeps you on your toes, that's for sure. But in the right way, she is always thinking about how she can win today, but is always thinking about the big thing for Emma is around the legacy of the program, making sure that we start to look at the game through a female lens. It's something that we've never done. All the research is on the men's game. So, the work that she is doing around our strategy for the women's game is, not just about how do we be in a position to A, qualify and then B, win the World Cup next year in Brazil, but it goes way, way beyond that. Some of the sort of strategic pieces that she's been part of pulling together. It's great to be a part of, that's for sure.
And just looking ahead to the World Cup in the summer again, does Maurizio get longer with the players than, say, Thomas Tuchel would in England?
No, it's the same. So we'll come together at the end of the season. So we'll be at the National Training Centre for around 10 days. We've got two games, a game in Chicago against Germany and a game in Charlotte against Senegal. And then we will, after that sort of initial final two-game prep, we'll then head over to base camp to the West Coast to be, based there permanently in preparation for our first game. So yeah, it's everybody sort of on the same starting line with regards to that situation.
Everyone is looking for a new edge. To find it, you need fresh perspectives. Our sponsor, Genius Sports, uses advanced AI, unique mesh tracking data, and tactical video to help analysts and coaches see and understand the game from every possible angle. This includes player POVs from the 3D recreation tool that sits within their performance studio, already being used by top clubs in the Premier League, Ligue 1, Pro League, and more. Genius pairs football's most extensive tracking data set ever with multiple automatically synced video angles for the fastest, smartest insights. Join the world's top clubs and find your new edge today. Learn more at www.geniussports.com/TGG.
How did you first get involved in football?
I was at Cardiff City as a schoolboy, as an apprentice. Never made it, never believed in it for myself, if I'm honest. But I had one individual, a guy called Gavin Tate, who ran the youth program at Cardiff City at the time, who has always been influential in my career and has always helped me along the way. So I actually, when I got released, went to university, went to college and then university, and he brought me back as a part-time coach. I did the under-14s at Cardiff City when the Centres of Excellence first started many, many years ago. And then he moved to Sunderland to become the academy director at Sunderland, and presented the opportunity for me to come in. I think it was originally for a 6-week period throughout the summer, just until they found someone long-term. And, went in for 6 weeks, never signed a contract and stayed for 6 years. So your first opportunity. And, Sam Aman, who was at Wimbledon, took over the club, and we went from a small centre of excellence to then have the ambition to become an academy. So, I always think like you have to work hard, but also like I was lucky with some of the opportunities that came my way early on in my career. To be so young and to have the opportunity to run a small centre of excellence in an academy, a great club like Cardiff City, which was my hometown club as well, I was hugely lucky, that's for sure.
And was that sort of halcyon period when they had some of the great players coming through?
Yeah, so when I joined Earnshaw, Robert Earnshaw and James Collins were just coming out of the system. We had Aaron Ramsey in the system as a 9-year-old, who went on obviously to have an amazing career. Chris Gunter, who had, a great career for Wales. James Collins was probably about 13 at that time then in the system. So, yeah, there was some great players that were in the system, and I can't take any credit. We had a great group of small staff that supported that, and obviously the foundations that were set by Gavin Tate, who was in the role previous to me, were really solid. So yeah, the club was in a really good position at that period.
That's quite a list of players, isn't it? Really, who went on to be mainstays for Wales after that.
Yeah, it was, and we always think about the ones that you always think about the ones that got away. The Gareth Bales and. But at that time, say this respectfully, Cardiff City was a tiny centre of excellence program at the time, and Southampton at the time were already investing and always had done in their program. So I always feel it's better for players to stay local if they can, but clearly it didn't do Gareth any harm going to Southampton and having the career that he had. It was never easy to keep the players, at the club long term, because there was always predator clubs that would come in as soon as they got to play for Wales at under 15s. Remember the old Victory Shield? It was like a live trial for every kid that played for Wales live on TV on Sky Sports on a Friday night. I'd never seen more scouts in my life go to a game. So but I felt like as if we did a good job and a good program with good values, and we were fortunate enough to produce some players who have gone on to have really great careers and represented Wales, which is always nice.
And then you went on to Southampton after that?
Yeah, so that was what an experience that was. So I had 6 years at Southampton as the academy director. Malcolm Elias and God rest his soul, and Hugh Jennings did a fantastic job for many years before me. Again, I was fortunate enough to come in at a good time. established program, good level of investment, and inherited a lot of great staff, but also some phenomenal young players. You had the likes of James Ward-Prowse, Luke Shaw, Callum Chambers, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, all sort of under 9s, 10s, and 11s at that time, who have gone on to unbelievable things. I think Gareth was 16 or 17 and he'd made strides already with the first team. Theo was a year older, Theo Walcott. So yeah, it was a phenomenal period. But I also think everyone says to me, "Well, Southampton at that period, what was the difference?" The club were unbelievable, even in administration, and when they got relegated, they always made sure there was money available for the youth teams. It's often the first thing to go at clubs. But Southampton deserved that reward. They kept back in the program, irrespective of where they were. And also, sometimes when you drop back a league, it gives a player that wouldn't necessarily get an opportunity. They might have to go on loan, gets them in the first team younger. So, we had the likes of, Alex as an example. Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain was in the first team at 17 playing in the Championship and grabbed his opportunity. And sometimes you wonder if it was the Premier League, whether those opportunities would have come as quick and through that same path. So, it was like we went from League One back in the Premier League under the guidance of Nicola Cortese, and like that happened really, really quickly. But a lot of players like Luke would have got, great minutes in the Championship. They would have had 40 odd games in the Championship before they took that step to the Premier League, which was a huge benefit when you build in your basic experience and your physical and mental robustness to play at the highest level.
Because you always need that opportunity, don't you? It doesn't matter how good the players are you're developing if they don't get the opportunity at the end of it.
Yeah, 100%. And I know a club like Southampton, it's always challenging because, say this respectfully, obviously we had a couple of good years, but the resources available in the Premier League means that you always need to get to 40 points as quick as you possibly can. That's always your target every year, So, maybe that changed a little bit under Maurizio's time and after that for a few years. But, survival was always your first port of call. And to do that whilst also developing and playing young players. I remember a game, it was in COVID. I think one of my most proudest times, because I was at the academy and I came back as sporting director then, proudest times is we played Liverpool at home in COVID. We won 1-0. Brilliant goal. I think with Shea Adams. And 50% of the team were homegrown. And we had Alex, I think it was the time Alex and maybe Adam Lallana were both from Southampton, were playing for Liverpool at the time. That was for me, we always wanted to get to that 50%, but it was always challenging to do that at the highest level.
And Maurizio was very good at continuing the development, wasn't he, when they got in the first team?
Brilliant. I mean, he's the perfect coach for any young player. You saw it with players that were developed also at Spurs. Like Dele Alli, how you get the better out of those unbelievable maverick talented players. He's able to do that. His level of emotional intelligence is very, very high. But he's also really challenging. He's a really strong father figure when he needs to be. It's not all softly. He's when he needs to be firm and tough, 100%, it. But also it comes from a real strong position of care, which is also really important.
I always think you've got to have guts as a manager as well to give that sustained opportunity, because it's easy to drop someone in as a sub at the end of the season or for the odd game, or to drop them when they're not doing as well, but to give that sustained opportunity, because they'll have ups and downs.
Yeah, 100%. And he's seen us through that, because we've had a difficult period where we were evolving the squad and trying some new players, some younger players. And we had one or two, really challenging results that I think if we hadn't have had Maurizio in charge, steady hand, saying the right things, we have to go, sometimes to get better, sometimes your results will dip before you come out the other end. And we definitely had that period. And, we are much, much better for that experience now. But, it takes a real strong manager to put the needs of the federation and the program above their own individual needs of winning. And Maurizio, so massive respect for what he's done in the game, but also for us as a federation.
And how did the move to the FA come about after that? And was that a hard decision to leave?
No, I always think you do cycles. I've always been lucky enough. So I did, 6 or 7 years at Cardiff City, done 6 or 7 years at Southampton. And it just felt like the right time. There was an opportunity to work with Dan Ashworth. And again, it was a new project. I'm a project type of guy. I like projects. I've never worked in international football. And I just saw this huge opportunity to go into the FA at a time where St George's Park was opening. Dan Ashworth had taken over as technical director, 6 months previously. You had Gareth Southgate there as the 21s coach. Dan was putting his leadership team in place, and it just felt like a great opportunity for me professionally and personally. And it proved absolutely to be that. Staying for 6 years and playing a small part in the success of the youth program there. The World Cup successes we had and the Euro successes over that period. Not saying that the FA were the reasons why we did those things. The support of EPPP and the clubs in that process was massive. So there's never one silver bullet, but yeah, it felt I was proud to do that role and learned so much from so many great people.
And what was it, sort of head of coaching? I'm trying to remember the exact job title.
Yeah, it was head of coaching and player development at the time for the youth national teams. And then the title changed to head of teams. So I was head of, it was all of the youth national teams on the boys' side, but then working closely with Brent and then subsequently Kay to try and support them on the female side. Not that they needed much supporting, they were hugely experienced people, but just trying to get alignment with the programs of where we could both share best practice,
And I was looking back at the webinar today that I was talking about, and you talked about those influential figures. So Dave Reddin, Dan Ashworth, and you talked about Kirk Vallis as well. So I wondered if you could say a little bit about those three.
Sure. So, I'll start with Dan. When you say having the opportunity to learn and develop at the FA, and I was given that, so lucky. For me, arguably, Dan he's the best sporting director and leader I've ever worked under in terms of his balance of, short-term, understanding the need for short-term success, but building a really strategic and getting, long-term plan. His brain, he's able to go into a grassroots meeting or a pro development meeting or a EPPP meeting and automatically switch and understand all of the content and be able to get his point across, listen, and he's just such an articulate professional. So I've learned hugely by him, and still somebody that I value as a mentor. Dave Reddin, Dave was my yin and yang, your opposites. Most people in football, when it comes to opposites, you make a decision to, work with people who are like you. It was probably the first time that I've ever had to try and work with someone who was so different in terms of his ideas, his leadership. And ultimately I learned so much from Dave around thinking outside the box, looking into other sports, to be more challenging, to look beyond to look, through someone else's lenses at things. And I know he's got a real challenging job right now in Wales rugby. So it's funny how that's gone full circle. But yeah, he's somebody that I admire and somebody that I have got a lot of respect for sure. And then I was fortunate enough, Dan enabled me to go on the technical director's course from the FA, and was fortunate enough to get a mentor like Kirk Vallis, and who obviously works for Google. And he was like, again, a very great business brain, great, leadership ideas around culture. And, to be able to have that to tap into as a resource as well as, other mentors was huge and was great for me. I actually I've lost touch with Kurt. I don't actually know what he's doing. It's probably hugely successful, whatever he's doing. But, somebody that made me think again beyond the here and now, like think about the future and challenge my thinking in many, many ways, which is what you need. Little things like, when you talk about a meeting, a one-to-one meeting, we'd have a meeting playing golf, and I'd come away after that round of golf and I'd be like, he'd leave me with about 10 things in my brain to like process and think about. And he would do it in such a subtle way, but I know it was all, looking back now, it was all strategic how he did it. He was beyond his years of that type of sort of taking you into an environment where you felt comfortable and then challenging and asking you the right questions. It wasn't about, people would say, that's a jolly up a game of golf. It wasn't like that. You came away feeling like my brain had been used more in that, golf 3 hours than it had done in 3 months. You really challenged your thinking.
And talking about some of those people there, so I think Dave Reddin had been involved with Olympic sports and rugby. Kirk, who you talked about, Reece Long came from rugby, I think, head of analytics. Pippa Grange had worked in business. And something I've seen in football, that probably the vast majority of recruitment is of people that are already within the network, or where the sporting director knows the head coach or the head of performance and so on. Would you say that is a shortcoming and have you seen the benefits of looking outside your network with that experience?
Oh, 100%. I always think, I think I learned this from Neil Bath, when he talks about I remember a presentation that he did and talked about his staff, needing to be, I think he talked about 1/3 either ex-Chelsea or come through the system or understand the values of the club, 1/3 from outside the club, but, from another high level, football organization, and then 1/3 different, people that have come from other, sports or business or whatever. And, I think Dan was the first one, I believe, to really take that seriously in that period where the recruitment of his sporting leadership team and the likes of Dave Redding coming in, you mentioned about Pippa and and numerous others like Reese, they came from other sports. And if I'm honest, before I went into that, I came from a typical football environment where if that would happen, I'd be like, what are we doing over there? Why are we appointing that person? They know nothing about football. But actually, being able to sit on working groups that Dan and Dave created with, we had a working group with England Rugby, England Cricket, and us used to come together, once every sort of quarter of the year, talk about challenges, problems, and stuff. Just like it was gold dust to see how others are thinking about similar problems, and then also to have the opportunity at the FA to work alongside some really talented people from other sports and business opened my eyes and made me much more broader to that type of thinking, and I've taken that through my career as well.
And you talked about liking projects and also learning about thinking outside the box, and it seemed like you really did do that at Southampton in your next job as the director of football.
When I reflect back at my time at Southampton, hugely proud in some ways to have had the opportunity to be the sporting director of a club that I've lived in Southampton for 19 years. My two children, oldest boys, are still in Southampton. They're big, still mad Southampton fans. Growing up there, I spent so many years at the academy. Things like to be the sporting director that recognises and sees James Ward-Prowse become the captain of the club, when he was an under-9 and an under-10 is something I'm, really proud of. But it was a really challenging period for the club. So I took over in the January, and by March we were into COVID. And when you're a club like Southampton and you're in, it's difficult to compete financially in the Premier League anyway. And then you have the challenges of COVID financially that had a huge impact on the club. It had a huge impact on, change of ownership, etc. Obviously we had, relegation, and you never want to have that, especially when you're a Southampton lad in some ways. I've lived there and my kids are born and brought up there. There's some regrets there for sure about how it all ended for me, both with, the club being, relegated from the Premier League, and also, I never really truly felt like as if I had the opportunity to really make the changes and to make the decisions as a sporting director there because of the difficult time the club was going through.
But it looked from the outside like you did do some quite, innovative, even radical things with the playbook, as I say, the B team, the splitting the coach, like the 21s, rather than having a head coach and assistant.
Yeah, we, there were things again that, fortunate enough to see and experience in an international environment that I thought potentially could give us a competitive edge around player development, which is Southampton's, renowned for that. We were going through a cycle where we weren't getting many players into the team. So what needs to change internally for that to start to kick on and forward? And like I say, there's a lot of things that I'm proud of in my 10 years at the club. And I was just, I guess, a bit sad and a bit disappointed that it ended in the way that it did, with a relegation and, me never really truly feeling like as if I had the opportunity to lead in the way that I wanted to. But, still proud of some of the things that we did, and some of the people that I got the opportunity to go back and work with. There's some great staff there, and it's a great club, that's for sure.
I suppose the relegation's not officially on your CV, is it? Because hadn't you left before that happened?
Yeah, but look, it's I was at the club for that period of time. There was a lot of challenges, obviously behind the scenes. But I take a part. I was the sporting director there, and but I left that role with a heavy heart in many ways. It's a club that I've hold dear to my heart. It's a club that I would call one of my clubs, and when you've worked somewhere for 10 years and the people, and also you understand the impact the relegation has on the staff. People lose their jobs for these things when these things happen, and that's always really sad because truly Southampton have some unbelievable lifers, some people who've done phenomenal job, way beyond, the what they get paid at the club. It's a great club in many ways.
I mean, it's fair to say I think they've still not fully recovered from that, really, have they? There's sort of signs of improvement now, but it's taken a while.
It's always hard. The club had a takeover, and when these things happen, there's a new direction and set and a new vision set, and all of that takes time to put into place. And it appears to be getting harder and harder every year when you get relegated by this year might prove the year that's different. But it's harder to then go back in and avoid being in that position again year after year. Even if you just look at the championship now, then the clubs that are currently fighting a relegation battle, all those have been Premier League and successful Premier League clubs through their time, and you would have never have ever thought 5 or 10 years ago that some of those clubs would have been in that position. But reality is, it's a real challenge. The level's really high, and there's an imbalance of resources across the clubs for sure.
And how did the move to US soccer come about at the end of that, if you don't mind telling us?
Yeah, sure. So I'd made the decision to resign in the December conversations with the club, and my intention was to work through to the May to allow them to get a good handover to the person that the new owners wanted to bring in, which proved to be Jason Wilcox. I received a call in the March to see if I would be interested in having some discussions over the US job, the sporting director's job. Originally, I went home and told my wife, and she said, "Well, how would that work? It's 3,000 miles away, But I convinced her to let me go to the interview process, because I felt like as if it would be good for me, personally, to go through a process. I hadn't gone through one for a long time. And yeah, it was a really detailed, thorough process. Got through the sort of first part, and then they invited us over to Denver, Colorado. Remember, it was the 1st of April, 8 a.m. interview. I thought it was April Fool's Day. I thought I was going to turn up and someone was going to prank me. But that was the final interview, where there was a number of tasks that I had to prepare for. Again, never thinking that I was going to get the job, because obviously it was a huge job, and there was, so many people out there that have done great things in this position. But yeah, after that interview, felt the chemistry, the dynamic was good. Felt like as if I could be a good cultural fit, and yeah, was fortunate enough for them to offer me the job. And then you take the job, and then you realize what the challenges ahead are in a very short space of time, which is finding your next coaches in the men's and the women's game. Yeah, it was a really challenging period, but also one where I learned a lot about myself. And I've got to say, everyone just assumes that because you've been a sporting director, like I left Southampton, my confidence was rock bottom. And it takes you a while to start to believe in yourself and believe in your leadership again. I'm thankful for yourself to give me that opportunity, and also that support where I had I mentioned about the president and the CEO. I believe in, I've improved as a leader, exponentially over the last 3 years. And I feel like as if I've had the opportunity to really put my stamp on a program here. And yeah, I'm proud to say that I'm a sporting director of US Soccer, and my family's happy and settled here, and it's been a really good period. I'm excited.
Why was your confidence so low at the end of that period at Southampton?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's never one silver bullet for these types of things. There was a leadership change at the top of the club. We were in a relegation position. We changed, managers a few times in that period, and you get a sense of where you fit within an organization, and sometimes where you don't fit. And sometimes that can be difficult to accept when you've been at a place for a long time and you care so deeply about it, and it can have an impact on your confidence. You never want to leave a place in a worse place than you found it. I remember one of the sayings from, I think it's the All Black, about leaving the shirt in a better place than where you found it. And I was disappointed from a league table perspective. That happened to me at Southampton. But I do believe that behind the scenes, there were positive things put in place that I was a part of. But if I'm truly honest, I never felt like as if I had the true opportunity to do the sporting director's role in the way that I wanted it to be done at the club.
I always think it's very hard to see through a long-term plan at a club, because you've got so much emotion and pressure week to week. Like I remember Stuart Webber said, I think, like the manager of Audi, he doesn't have all the customers waiting for him in the car park to shout at him,
Yeah, it's hard because I always look, you might have had a great week with something at a club, whether it be to do with the academy or getting something over the line or running, a key project. You've worked with a team, you're excited, and then you have a bad result on the Saturday, which ultimately means your Saturday night, you're on the phone. It means that you're in Sunday morning. It means that then you look at the fixtures and you realize you've got Man United away on the Tuesday night, and you go like, there's just no end to it. And I truly believe that the role in a federation suits me better than a club role. I found the dealings with the emotions of the wins or more so the losses at Southampton is very difficult to win games in the Premier League at the best of times. But when you're a club that's got some of the slimmest resources, it's even more challenging. So I think federation, and you work on cycles. You work on World Cup cycles 4 years. So to be able to sit with Emma and you're talking about a 4 year cycle and all the amazing things that happen in that cycle and building a strategy towards that is how I believe I work best. That's not saying that you can't take your eyes off the next camp for sure, but I think if you can build a strategy, there's more trust in the process when you hit a bump in the road. And we saw that pre last summer before Gold Cup with the men's team. We were able to trust the process with a great coach. We came out the other end in a much better place for it. I'm not sure whether you get that time sometimes at the highest level in club football.
Was it almost as soon as you came into the job that you had the situation with the men's senior head coach?
First thing I did, yeah.
Yeah, that looked very hard from the outside.
It was, because you don't have much context on what's gone on before. I didn't know Greg. Obviously, I was able to get some data from the last World Cup, and you look, and when it's a young squad, we're the second youngest in the World Cup. We had very little experience. I think most players, it was their first World Cup as well. First sort of major tournament like that. So, I didn't get to have a deep dive into the infrastructure of what we had in place, etc. That had to come a little bit later. The priority was, we had a September window, and, we needed to get the wheels turning. Again, it's all experiences, and the way I ran that process, we ran it then slightly different for Maurizio, slightly different for Emma. We're always evolving this, but what I want to be able to do for any decisions that we make is to present a really solid case for the why, and data and information that supports your decision making. So if you do come to a situation where you hit a bump in the road, you can refer back to the manual to say, hey, let's remember why we appointed this person. Let's remember the strategy. Let's remember the direction. And we always knew we were going to have bumps in the road. If you've not got that to fall back on, I would find that difficult.
And just a final question, what are your own ambitions? Because you're 51, I think.
Yes.
So, yeah, what do you see in the future?
I always say this, I've got 3 boys and an unbelievable supportive wife. We've never planned for anything. My dad's got a saying, your name's on a door somewhere. I want to be the best version of myself. I want to continue to learn and develop. But at some stage, I would love to be able to take a back seat and to go back and do my coaching, and to be able to volunteer back at Southampton to be their under-12s coach or whatever. I'd love to go back. So I did my pro license in my young 20s, I was a coach to start with. And then, in the involvement of academies, and when your program got bigger at Cardiff City, I had to make the decision, do you become a coach, or do you become a academy director? Because there was a time that you couldn't really do both. And I made the decision to go down the academy director route, which takes you off the grass. And I do feel like, selfishly, I have some unfinished business to give back to the game. And I'm not saying I want, ambitions of being a head coach, nothing like that. But just I want to give back to the game, or even if it's just back to where all my children grew up and play, grassroots in Hyde and Dibden Football Club, like to give something back. I think it would be a nice place to be, and also to go back to learn to be a coach again would be something I would very much like to do. Not right now, because I don't have the time, but I would love to be able to be in a position when hopefully when at some point it becomes in your destiny to be able to make those decisions, to be able to do those and give something back to the game.
Yeah, brilliant. Because we probably don't see that cycle, do we, when people go back to the beginning and start coaching, but you would have a heck of a lot to add and offer, like you say.
Well, I know I'd have a heck of a lot to learn now, because obviously the game continues to evolve, and player development and age-specific coaching, and it's something I'm really passionate about, and I can talk about with a experience because I see it firsthand. but actually to be on the ground and understand the challenges of coaching every day on a cold and wet Tuesday night with parents, with half your balls are flat or whatever it is. And I'd like to experience that and see if I could offer. That's for sure.
Well, that's fantastic. Thanks so much for your time, Matt.
You are so welcome, Simon.
Thank you for listening to the Training Ground Guru podcast in association with Genius Sports. We'll be back next month with another episode.